Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Mike Murphy and I'm the first speaker for this session. So these are all the financial reasons why you shouldn't believe what I'm going to say. But now I'll move on to the talk. What I'm going to talk about today is a new area that we've been involved in developing over the last decade or so. That's focusing in on mitochondria and the role of mitochondria in a whole plethora of different human diseases that are associated with aging. So what I'm going to talk to you about is this development of mitochondria-targeted therapies and how that can be applied to a whole range of different age-associated diseases. So for that, I'm going to give a bit of background on mitochondria, the approaches we use, some of the applications, and then I'll be available for questions or anything you want to follow up with later on. So, first off, if you look, this is a typical cell, and you can see there's a boring black bit in the middle that no one really cares about. It's boring, doesn't do anything. All the exciting stuff in the cell occurs in these dynamic little organelles here, mitochondria. And mitochondria, as you remember from your kindergarten biochemistry, are essential for providing energy. So about 95% of the oxygen we breathe goes to our mitochondria. The mitochondria then use that to form a potential across their membrane and use that to drive ATP synthesis in the process called oxidative phosphorylation. So we know that the vast majority of the ATP that comes from mitochondria drives the energy. So if mitochondria are not working, the energetics of your cell are screwed. Your cells aren't going to work well. We've known that for a very long time, and we've understood the mechanism by which mitochondria actually make energy available. And so in our minds, we've tended to associate mitochondria just with a narrowish range of energy and metabolic-dependent disorders. And we know there are primary metabolic defects where if you have a mutation in the genes that are required to assemble mitochondria or mitochondrial metabolism, then you come down with some nasty diseases that tend to present with musculoskeletal difficulties or neurological difficulties because those tissues require lots of ATP. But in addition, there are a whole range of secondary mitochondrial diseases which are very important because in these cases, chronic mitochondrial damage or dysfunction accumulating over a long period of time leads to mitochondrial dysfunction and leads to the cell becoming damaged. Now these are associated with things that we really care about in terms of trying to treat patients. These are the diseases of the 21st century. Neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, obesity, inflammatory disorders, and a range of other acute disorders such as heart attack and stroke. Now, in these diseases, mitochondria are critically involved, but they're not necessarily the prime driver of the disease. That's interesting, though, because it means that mitochondrial dysfunction accumulates with age and contributes to the pathology and to the etiology of the disease. Also, it means that if we have a way of attacking mitochondria or treating mitochondria, we have a new class of therapies that could be applied not just to narrow specific diseases, but potentially to a very wide range of disorders that contribute to the aging phenotype that we're all very worried about. Well, some of you aren't. You're obviously very young, but I'm worried about it. So we want to think about how we can deal with these mitochondrial disorders that we haven't always thought about as being important. And remember, now we understand that mitochondria contribute not just to energy, but to things like apoptosis, necrotic cell death, inflammatory disorders, and chronic damage to mitochondria contributes to a very wide range of diseases. A common feature then that we might want to attack in mitochondria is the production of reactive oxygen species. What we know is that mitochondria are the major intracellular source of reactive oxygen species, which we know are non-specific radicals derived primarily from superoxide, and that goes on to a whole stream of downstream ROS, such as hydrogen peroxide. Now, what happens is the respiratory chain in mitochondria produces continually a small amount of superoxide that goes on to hydrogen peroxide. Probably the reason it does this is probably an important signaling mechanism that we're just beginning to understand. But in addition, when that production is completely out of whack, we're producing far too much in certain pathological situations, we get a build-up of damage to the mitochondria in the cell. And that contributes to a whole range of different disorders. So we think this oxidative damage to mitochondria is a common theme in a very wide range of diseases. And there are two aspects to that. The first is, if it goes really out of whack, you get extensive oxidative damage, like in heart attack, stroke, some inflammatory disorders, and that really abolishes the mitochondria and the cell dies. But more subtly, these mitochondrial ROS production are also involved in signaling between the mitochondria and the nucleus in ways we're just beginning to understand. And when these get disrupted, for example, in diabetes or aging or neurodegeneration, that contributes to a whole range of diseases. Another important area we're just beginning to understand is inflammatory disorders. It's clear that mitochondrial redox signaling is very important in setting up and establishing inflammatory, particularly the innate immune system, in responding to what's called sterile inflammation, cell damage. So for all these reasons, we're very interested in understanding, can we block or modify these? So